Sherry Boas is a wonderful author. She's also a wonderful mother. She and her husband are raising children they've adopted. And I watched her over the years adopt the children and raise them. She used to come to the Adoration Chapel in my former parish and spend time in there with her children, all of them, and they were so good. This is a mother who knows how to raise her children in Christ.
I'd like to talk about the joy of the vocation of parenthood as it relates to my walk in this journey of motherhood. The vocation of every person who has been given the great gift of a child is to raise that child to be holy. And that means the vocation of every mother and father is to help the children get to heaven. And this is where the joy of parenting has its roots. Because where do we derive our joy? True joy comes from knowing we are doing what the Lord has called us to do, and that we are in His perfect plan. And that is what gives our life its meaning. So vocation is what infuses joy into our life. And every person who's been granted a child is given a vocation, and therefore an opportunity for great joy. And all we have to do is open our arms wide and embrace it. And so much of the vocation of parenthood has to do with the simple response to the present moment. The dishes are in the sink, all piled up. You put on your rubber gloves, and then the baby cries, of course, wakes up from his nap at that particular time. And so what do you do? In the business world, we would call that prioritizing. But in God's kingdom, it is much simpler because it's about the abandonment to the present moment. And God is in the present moment. That's why we must abandon ourselves there. If God had been worried about the particles of food stuck to those plates, the baby would have slept a bit longer. And if God is not vexed over the dirty dishes, then neither should we be. So parenthood is a training in surrender, which doesn't come naturally. It certainly has not come naturally to me, but God has given me many teaching moments. I'm an impatient person by nature, but the beauty of this vocation to motherhood, to parenthood, is that you don't have to be perfect. If you turn your life over to God, He can use your weaknesses and your flaws. Just to give you an example, my wedding day just happened to correspond with my fertile time. So my husband and I naturally assumed we would be conceiving a baby on our honeymoon. We were talking about naming our first boy Michael. We both love that name. Wouldn't you know it, we were sitting there in the restaurant, and there was a piano bar there, and the lounge singer, as we were talking about our first son being named Michael, happened to sing, "Michael, row your boat ashore." So we were absolutely sure that this was a sign that we would have a baby boy, that we had conceived a baby boy possibly right there on our honeymoon, and that we would have our Michael. Well, we did not conceive on our honeymoon, and even a year later we hadn't conceived a child. And we became many of the couples struggling with infertility. It became clear that God was requiring us to wait. And I don't always do so well with that. But I heard stories of people that waited years and years for a child, even more than a decade to be conceived. As an impatient person, that to me just seemed inconceivable. So before we'd even reached our 2-year anniversary, I was on the phone with Catholic Social Services asking about adoption. They told me that their orientation meeting was, like 3 months off, and they only have for a year. So they were going to require us to come to this orientation in 3 months before they would accept us into the program, or consider accepting us. And when I heard the 3-month wait, I just thought, well, are you serious? You're going to make us wait 3 months? We're ready now. So I said, I told her, I said, look, we're ready to be parents. And she said, I said, I don't want to wait till the orientation, and then we come in, and you tell us, oh, our program is full, or we are not going to accept you, because they only accept a certain number of families every year. And so she said, well, let me just ask you a few questions on the phone, and I'll tell you whether you would qualify. And so she asked me questions about what type of issues or challenges or disabilities or ethnicities that we would be open to. And we were very open to many things. She said, well, okay, how about if you come into our office tomorrow, you and your husband, and we'll do an intake. Is that soon enough for you? So off we went, and she gave us paperwork, and she told us that, it's up to us how long it would take for, how long we would take to fill out the forms. As soon as we got them all done and we got our dear birth parent letter written, then we would be able to be put in a big book of letters that is presented to birth parents about adoptive families that are wanting to adopt a child. I rushed home. I think I had steam coming off my computer keyboard, smoke coming off with my fingers flying, how fast I wrote that. And they were pretty shocked how fast I got all that done. They sent it off to their various agents. So what happened was the day that a baby was born in Tucson, who was exposed to crack cocaine, alcohol, and cigarettes, and whose birth mother was going to give her up for adoption, my dear birth parent letter was on the desk in an envelope waiting to be opened by the social worker at the hospital on that very day. She had just opened it. So were it not for my impatience, we wouldn't have our Maria right now. Now, I'm not saying that impatience is a virtue. I'm just saying that God can work with whatever you turn over to Him. So you don't have to be perfect to be a parent, but you can't be passive, because there's a mighty war that's been waged for our children's souls. And you see it in the media. There's an agenda to shape our children and their beliefs. And many times it's in opposition to our Christian values. And it's not just the children that the media is trying to affect. They're trying to shape our ideas too about parenting, about parenthood as well, that it's a burden, it's drudgery, it's unremarkable, it's unimportant. Or on the other hand, it's a right that everyone's entitled to. It's a remedy to aching emptiness, or it's sheer bliss. And none of the above is true. It is simply this. It's a great gift. And so we should be saying what Mary said in her Magnificat: "The Lord has done great things for me." If we've been granted a child, we need to say that in our souls and proclaim it. The Lord has better things in mind for us than what we could have even planned or dreamed of ourselves. I mean, the children that we quote unquote dreamed of early on in our marriage, and even as a little girl, the children that I thought I saw the picture in my mind of what my family might look like, were not given to us, but we were given much more awesome children than what I ever dreamed of. And so the abandoning ourselves to what God wants for us will actually bring us the most joy, and more joy than we can imagine. And I have beautiful stories about all of my 4 children, all who are adopted. One was exposed to crack in utero, as I said earlier. One has Down syndrome. One was born at 25 weeks gestation and was nearly aborted. All of them are thriving. All have beautiful, miraculous stories. But I'll tell you about John's, because it's a perfect illustration of what the vocation of motherhood is really about, what it really means. I had been praying after our daughter, she's the one who has Down syndrome, I had been praying for another baby, but not very fervently, just, asking God, please send us another child, And one day it hit me that the root in the problem lies in the fact that the women in crisis pregnancies are walking in the wrong door. This is why we are waiting for children. This is why there's a shortage of babies. This is a problem about abortion. And the scripture hit me, what Jesus said to his disciples, that this kind of demon can only be driven out through prayer and fasting. And so I told God that I would give up sugar. I went on a sugar fast until there was a baby in the house. Now, anybody who knows me will probably gasp at that notion, because I love desserts, I love my sugar, I love all those great sweet treats, but God also knows I'm impatient. So that was on a Friday, and on Monday the phone rang. And the adoption counselor told me that there was a baby who was born 15 weeks early. He had a multitude of medical issues. They put him in an incubator. So the counselor on the phone was telling me the story about how this baby now, she had another family that had backed out, but because he was severely medically challenged. He had a lot of, he had just had surgery, he had an ostomy bag, he had wires coming out everywhere, and it really wasn't clear that this baby would even survive. But, and that he would have a 70% chance of having cerebral palsy, is what his brain scans had shown. So she said to me, I don't even know why I'm calling you, because you already have 3 children. I don't know how you're going to make the trips to the hospital for the next 15 weeks, because it's predicted he'll be in the hospital for 15 weeks. And she said, so I don't even know why I'm calling you. And I said, well, I know why, and I want to proceed. I want to hear more, and I'll talk to my husband about it. She says, okay, but before you see the baby, I want you to meet with the doctor and find out all the medical things that are involved with this, because I don't want you to see the baby unless you want to go forward, because he's powerful and he will suck you in. So we met with Dr. Kraft, the neonatologist at the hospital, and we sat there in a room with her and my husband and the adoption counselor, and we talked to her about this baby's future. And at some point, the adoption counselor asked the neonatologist, what is it that this baby needs from an adoptive family? And she said, the baby needs love. And so my husband and I, we didn't say anything to each other, but we both knew what we were thinking. You know, we have that. We can give this child that. We went to hold the baby. I held him. He had a head the size of a tangerine, perfect hairline, just beautiful baby boy, all perfect. Yes, all the respirator and the tubes and everything like that, all connected, but he was perfectly formed at 25 weeks, just a perfect human being. I passed him off to my husband, and he held him, and I heard this, oh, and I thought, yeah, we've adopted that baby, because then the next breath out of my husband's mouth was he looked up at the doctor and says, we'll take good care of him, Doc. And later I gave him a little bit of hard time for making that executive decision, but he said, I knew what you were going to say. I knew you were going to say yes anyway, and so, and he was right. But we were facing many medical issues, and we were told that it would be important to, after we signed the adoption papers, to quickly bond with this baby, visit the baby often, and that's what we did. We would go and talk to the baby, read to the baby, sing to the baby, and on the days that we could hold him, it wasn't every day that we were allowed to hold him, but we did. We established this bond with this little person that wasn't even supposed to be out of the womb yet, but quite a few weeks went by, and he had to have a surgery to resection his intestine, because they had found a blockage very early on in his life, and that's why he had an ostomy bag. And so they were going to resection the intestine, and then he would be able to start drinking from a bottle. And not until then, he had not drank from a bottle until then. After the surgery, there was quite a bit of anxiety about whether he was going to learn to eat, and the newborn has to multitask to eat. The newborn has to suck, swallow, and breathe all at the same time. So he was going to have to learn this. And so every day that I would go, every time I'd go to feed him in the hospital, I would pray a rosary on the way. So I had that going for me. I also had the fact that I'm an Italian mother, and you don't tell an Italian mother that you're not going to eat. So the first feeding was a triumph. He was, all he ate was what would fit inside of a nipple. But it was a triumph. It was wonderful, and he worked his way up. Every time he would eat a little more and a little more, so things seemed to be going well. And one day they told me that they were going to put in a feeding tube. And I said, why? Why would you put in a feeding tube? And they said, well, he's not eating. And I said, yes, he is eating. And they said, no, the only one who could feed him is you. And so that, it was a shock to me, and it pointed out the mystery of of parenthood, that this is a spiritual mystery. This child, and you can't blame it on the fact that he had, I had carried him in my womb, and he had known my voice for these many weeks or whatever. It's just some mystery that shows us that every person who's given a child is given this vocation that only they can fulfill. But anyway, so the day finally came when he could be released from the hospital, and I had an appointment with the pediatrician, and I was in there with John. It was like the day after he had we named him John, the day after he came out of the hospital, which was just such a glorious day. But and she came into the examining room and she said, "Oh, I hear you're an angel." And I said, "An angel?" And she says, "Yeah, I was over at the hospital trying to get caught up on what's been going on with this baby, and they told me that they were." And I asked him, "Why in the world would you send home a baby who can't eat from a bottle?" And they said, "Well, because the mother's the only one that can feed him." This is what every parent is called to do. It was like one of those wonderful life moments where I thought, if I am only alive to feed this child, I have fulfilled this incredible, task and vocation. And that's really where we're all at as parents. If you've been given a child, and that's where your joy comes from, is not only feeding the child physically, but spiritually helping them get to heaven. We were ecstatic to have John home after 15 weeks in the hospital, but little did we know that the real trial was about to begin. Because he had been on intravenous feeding for so long, he couldn't eat from a bottle. His liver was failing. His liver was supposed to rebound after he was on bottle feeding for a number of days or maybe weeks. But instead of his bilirubin, which measures the health of your liver, instead of the numbers going back to normal, they were going in the opposite direction, and they were very concerned. So the pediatrician sent us off to the specialist, and the specialist did a number of tests and couldn't figure out what was wrong with this child. And we really had, it was a tough several months, but I was giving him 5 medications a day, 10 times a day. We had this gigantic oxygen tank in our family room, the size of a Christmas tree. We had the apnea monitor. I had to hold him up at night to sleep because he had terrible reflux. You couldn't lay him down. So we had a nurse come to the house, and she would come and give him shots. And one day she looked at my piano and she says, "Oh, you play the piano?" And I said, "Well, yeah, not so much anymore." And she says, "Well, what do you do for for yourself?" And I didn't know what to say, because I didn't want her to think I was going to go nuts, trying to raise this little baby. So I made, "Oh yeah, I write. I like to write," I think I said, even though I hadn't written in years. But so I told my husband this story after. I said, "Oh, the nurse asked me, what do I do for myself?" I didn't know what to say. And he said, "Well, did you tell her you were busy saving a life?" And before that, I had never thought of that. I never thought I was doing, kind of like what each moment required. Every milliliter of medicine, counting every wet diaper and every bowel movement. And I was on this very strict schedule with him, moment by moment. But I never thought of this, I'm saving a life, really? And it's what all parents are called to do. We're saving lives by feeding our children, by protecting them, keeping them warm, clothed, and happy, and but much more, by getting them to heaven. And the beautiful thing is, we are not in it alone. We have Mother Church to help us. And we would soon learn this in a big way. With John's liver failure, we had just adopted him. Father Doug came to the hospital to baptize him. And when his life was in danger because of his liver failure, Mother Church was with us again in a big way. She pulled all of her resources, those in heaven and those on earth, to come to our aid. When the specialist couldn't figure out what was wrong, there was only one other choice left to do, and that was to do surgery and take a liver biopsy. What that would mean is he would have to go back under anesthesia, back on the respirator, and it was just something that was just so heartbreaking to me. We had surgery scheduled, and my oldest daughter came down with a cold and passed it on to the baby. And I had forbidden my children to get sick, because the doctor had told me before he got out of the hospital, before John got out of the hospital, that he wasn't allowed to get sick. He wasn't allowed to get a cold, or he could have permanent lung damage the rest of his life. If you get him through the first winter without a cold, then he'd be okay. So I was just, I couldn't believe, oh no, the baby had a cold. Well, because of the cold, the liver biopsy had to be postponed. So it was postponed for, I think about 11 days later, and it hit me one day, like, what can we do in the meantime? I really don't want this surgery to have to happen. It hit me that we have a time for a novena, the 9 days of prayer. So my children and I, we wrote a little novena. I say little because I let the children do this. They wrote a very simple prayer to Mother Teresa. And they asked her, something real simple, like, "Dear Mother Teresa, while you were on earth, you loved the sick and you loved children, so please heal our baby boy." When we realized that we had this time and that my daughter had gotten a cold for a reason, it was a good moment. But what happened was we were praying this novena, and for some reason I felt within that time that I should have John before the Blessed Sacrament, before Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. So very rarely did I ever take him. Did I take him anywhere because he wasn't supposed to get sick? But I decided that I would take him to a Friday night Mass with Father Doug, and sit way far away from everybody. And so that's what I did that day. And Father Doug said something during that homily about healing ministries, and he said he was talking about Sister Briege McKenna. And so after she has a healing ministry, and after Mass, I ran up to Father Doug and I said, "I need to find someone in Arizona who has a healing ministry, because this baby is in need of a miracle." And I said, who can I take him to? And Father Doug pointed across the church at Father Howie, who was there, had not been there to celebrate Mass, but was there for some reason. And I didn't know at the time that Father Howie has a healing ministry through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So, but anyways, I made a beeline. Father Doug blessed John too, and then I made a beeline over to Father Howie, and I just said, "Okay, this baby needs a miracle." He prayed a very short prayer with asking the intercession of the Blessed Mother, and off I went. And the next day, John had gained an ounce, and the day after that, he had gained another ounce, and the day after that, he gained another ounce, which was big because if he gained an ounce every 3 days, it was a major thing for him. Liver patients have a hard time gaining weight, so I was thinking and knowing that something was happening, and that our prayers were being heard, and that John was being healed. And but my problem was that we had this the surgery scheduled, so I called up the doctor and I said, can we get a bilirubin test? This is what will test the liver functions. And she told me no, that the numbers would never show anything different in that short amount of time, and it would just blow out a vein, and the hospital would need all the veins they could get to do this surgery, the IVs for the surgery. So she denied that, and then I called the specialist, and he also said no, same thing. You're not going to see any movement in numbers in this short amount of time. It takes weeks and months for any difference to show on the bilirubin. So I decided, I thought, okay, I have one more shot, because we have to go to the pulmonologist to see if his lungs are clear to have surgery. So 2 days before the surgery, we went to the pulmonologist, and he said, yes, his lungs are fine, he can have surgery. And I said, do you mind if we just do another bilirubin test? Because I feel like this baby is really, there's something changing, something's happening, he's getting better. And the pulmonologist was like, yeah, sure, okay. So the bilirubin is the number that shows whether your liver is under stress or is failing. And if his bilirubin, John's bilirubin, was a 12 when he got out of the hospital, it's supposed to be less than 1. And then it went up to a 13. So the doctors were concerned. They couldn't figure out why it was. His liver was failing like this. We had the bilirubin test, and the nurse from the pulmonologist's office called the next day and told me, that the bilirubin was a 5. And the sound of her voice, she thought I would be disturbed by this, but I was ecstatic because it had gone from a 13 to a 5 in a matter of days. And I was jumping up and down. I knew this was a miracle. I knew it meant that he was going to be healed. And my children were watching me jump up and down while I was on the phone with this nurse, and they knew too. They knew something great was happening. But so I called the doctor, and they called off the surgery, and they told me if all the numbers came back to normal, that they would not have to do surgery and do the biopsy at all. So they were going to watch and monitor him over the next period of weeks and months, but in a matter of like 3 weeks, all the numbers had come back to normal. Not just the bilirubin, but all the other numbers that can take literally 6 months to a year to show that they've come back. All the liver panels were normal, and the doctors were mystified. They didn't know what to credit with this, but we do, and so we are not mystified. We know what happened, and it's not always clear where God is going with His plans. Not until you look back on it, but we know that we are called to do at every moment. So many people lament that children do not come with owner's manuals, but what would the manual say anyway regarding how to raise children? Number 1, love them. Number 2, teach them to love God. Number 3, learn from them how to love God. And number 4, repeat every moment of every day. And that is what God is calling us to do. And therein lies the joy of the vocation of parenthood.
In my work as a priest, I've been in parishes where there were predominantly young families with lots of children. And I'm in a parish now that is older. Most, I think the largest number of people are older people because of the area. And it doesn't matter where you are, every single one of the parents that I've encountered, old or young, they want the best for their children. I think that this is like a universal. They don't want to do it wrong. They don't want to give their child some kind of heartache that they're going to have to spend years getting over with. The truth is we don't always know how. I think some parents, that the lament that I hear the most is from the older people. And they tell me I was too strict, or I demanded too much. I didn't give enough love. I didn't put enough love in it. Isn't that interesting? I wonder if other priests have the same experience. They look and their children aren't going to Mass. Their kids are raised and having kids of their own. They're not going to Mass, many of them. And they feel they failed something. And they don't understand that kids sometimes will do that they'll walk away. They won't go to Mass. And then at some point in their life, they want to, and they come back. And we have to leave lots of room for mistakes, lots of room for God. It doesn't all work according to the book. But I think this series, the reason we did it, was to give people who are going to be parents, especially those preparing for marriage, those preparing to have their first baby or even the second or third, those who are wanting better tools. We just really want to give you some things to think about. It isn't a manual on how to raise your kids. And it certainly isn't a doctrinal manual on how to teach kids the Catholic faith. That's someone else's job. This is reflecting on how you bring your children into that arena where the Holy Spirit wants to produce fruit. These 9 fruit of the Spirit that we've been pointing to, that's the fruit He wants to produce in the soul of your child. So God bless you. I hope and wish every good gift for you as a parent.